Mr. Chairman.
The Honourable Ruth Dyson.
Mr. Chairman, I was actually enjoying that contribution from the Honourable Trevor Mallard so much that I actually was hoping that he'd take a second call. I'm very disappointed that he didn't take the opportunity to have a second call in this debate. I share his concern that the Minister whose name is attached to this bill is not able to answer the questions in the House. Because, frankly, the Minister who is in the chair would have done a far better job. This is the sort of bill that a government produces when they're in lots of bother. And actually, over the last 12 months, they have been in lots of bother, most recently with their disgraceful treatment of Canterbury schools, of our communities and of our principals and teachers. And, of course, today we see their shonky deal between John Key and Sky City Convention Centre exposed by the Auditor General's report. This is the reason this is the sort of bill that the government would quickly put together to try and take the heat off other more troublesome aspects is because it's only a tiny little part of the job. Mr. Chairman, we know that this area actually requires a comprehensive approach rather than just cherry-picking the little bits that are easy. There is nowhere more obvious than in the difficulty that the government has been, in fact over the last 4 years, not just over the last year, in terms of privacy breaches. There's no examples which make it more obvious that if you're introducing legislation to enable privacy sharing, that you need to do it in a comprehensive and systematic way. The Law Society made a submission to this bill, as did others, that said that this was a very shallow approach, that it would have been far better to have done that sort of comprehensive approach. Mr. Chairman, we've actually had the Law Commission look into this very area, and they said this needs a comprehensive, systematic approach to the issue of privacy sharing. It's a huge responsibility of government. It's actually a massive responsibility of individual ministers. The Honourable Dr. Nick Smith will know that a lot of information comes over the desk of a minister, and as ministers you have to take it very seriously. Never to use that, never to breach the privilege that you have as part of the responsibility of being a minister. That's why this issue is so important. People write to ministers, government departments and agencies give ministers advice which exposes personal details about people on the understanding that that information will never ever be shared inappropriately. And tragically, Mr. Chairman, we've seen that privilege of ministerial responsibility breached. It was breached by Paula Bennett in a way that I thought was disgraceful. It's never ever been seen in our country before. Two women on the domestic purposes benefit criticised Paula Bennett and John Key and her government because her decision, the minister's decision, was to scrap the training incentive allowance. That minister herself had the advantage of going to university as a sole mother because of the training incentive allowance. I think it's a fantastic thing that we give particularly women who have the responsibility of bringing up a child additional state support so that they can have a better life and future for them and their child. That training incentive allowance was taken off for university courses from domestic purpose beneficiaries. So these two women on the DPB criticised the minister for that decision. They said, we wanted to go to university, we wanted to get a degree and therefore have a better future for ourselves and our family. What did the minister do? Instead of engaging and saying, look, we're desperately short of money, we're just given a whole lot of tax cuts to wealthy people, so we had to claw back the money from somewhere, and who's better to get it off than women on the DPB? I can imagine her saying that. Instead of engaging as a responsible minister in a rational debate, the minister gave to the media, not behind closed doors, openly gave to the media personal, private details about those women, and the media published them. I think that is a disgrace. It is an absolute breach of the privilege of the responsibility that very few people in our country have the privilege of being a minister and being entrusted with such personal details, Mr Chairman.
I call the Honourable Ruth Dyson.
Mr Chairman, so I guess I have some anxiety about this legislation because it's been introduced as a method of making access to services and support from government departments and agencies more efficient and more effective. And who could argue with that? Anyone in this House would stand up and say, we want the most efficient, most effective public services. Of course, every single member believes in that. But this legislation, to allow more sharing of information, which may contain private personal details of individuals, is being brought to this House in an environment where it is frankly impossible to trust ministers of the Crown with that information. So it's very hard for us to have confidence that the rigour has been applied to this legislation within a frame of knowing that that privacy should be respected. Mr Chairman, of course, we've had some pretty horrific examples of where existing provisions in relation to privacy haven't enabled individuals to have that respect maintained. We've had thousands of people being sent the wrong ACC files, and I'm sure the Minister in the chair is well aware of that. There is nothing more frustrating as a minister than to read on the front page of the paper that your department has sent a whole lot of files to the wrong person. But ACC have done it over and over again. They don't seem to learn anything from it. In Canterbury, I've had examples of EQC doing exactly the same thing. Mr Chairman, I had a constituent who came to me and said, I've made a complaint to ACC. I've asked for my file. I've asked for my scope of works, I've asked for the assessment of my house, and I haven't got it, so I've complained. And I said, well, I'm happy to help you get that information if I can, but your complaint will go along a separate path. I won't be doing anything in that regard. So I asked what had happened to this man's file, and I was advised it had been sent out that very day. Extraordinary coincidence, of course. What I found out, though, was that it wasn't his file that was sent to him, it was someone else's file. So he rang me and he said, well, I've just got somebody else's file. Should I take it down the road and give it to them? They've clearly asked for it, or should I send it back? I said, well, I think you just should put it in an envelope and send it back because you don't know if that man actually wanted it or not. I then rang EQC and I said, look, you've sent him the wrong information and I want him to get his own file promptly. This isn't sharing between departments. This is the incompetence of one agency. What they replied, Mr Chairman, in writing was that they had sent him a file. Turns out it was the wrong one, but they had closed his request, and if he wanted his own file, he'd have to start all over again and make another request. Absolute nonsense. That's the sort of incompetence that is driven by the lack of concern and compassion and attention to detail that ministers in the current cabinet are demonstrating. And of course, the biggest blunder of all, and it involves large numbers of breaches of privacy, is Nova Pay. I bet Stephen Joyce wishes he had never heard that word. Craig Foss, I'm sure, is delighted to have that responsibility of Nova Pay handed over to the Minister for Everything, the Honourable Stephen Joyce. We know that many teachers and support staff around the country have had the private details of other teachers and support staff sent to them in error. Mr Chairman, what we are seeing in the current system, regardless of this legislation, are breaches of privacy, either through incompetence or deliberate malice, as was the case in the example I used earlier of the Honourable Paula Bennett, where she deliberately disclosed private information. So as we go through the remaining parts of this legislation, I think there's 3 in all, as we go through this, I hope that the House can be given more confidence than I currently have that this privacy information sharing bill, if it's passed, will not make the current situation worse. This has to be done as a means of ensuring that people get better service, that government departments and agencies are able to share information appropriately for the betterment of the client, the New Zealand citizen, and that at all times their personal privacy will be respected.
I call the honourable member Claire Curran.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to take a call in the committee stages of this bill and